Hey everyone, another day, another handheld, with this one being the GB300. The GB300 is a new budget vertical handheld that's currently floating around the $15 to $20 mark, so it's certainly looking to be this year's Datafrog SF2000. The GB300 claims to have support for up to 7 emulators and over 6,000 games, but in truth it struggles with the harder Super Nintendo games, and the majority of Game Boy Advance games are a slideshow. That said, NES, Game Boy Color and the majority of Megadrive mostly play okay, so let's check it out. So, according to the spec list on its various listings, the GB300 has a SL4350 CPU and 1GB of RAM, though on closer eye the B on the listings are lowercase here, so it's looking much more like 128 megabytes of RAM. So performance is very close to the Datafrog SF2000. Otherwise, we've got a 800 mAh battery, which is good for a couple of hours of gameplay, stock firmware and a relatively low weight too, which certainly isn't surprising considering the rest of the specs. Straight out of the box, the GB300 certainly looks like a low price budget handheld with a budget but, to be fair, very robust plastic shell. To its credit, the GB300 has a very sensible layout too, with a volume rocker which we always like to see, power switch and microSD card slot on its right side, 2 shoulder buttons and easy access to its battery on the back, and a volume jack and USB-C charging port on top. Otherwise, the GB300 is built pretty well all round. It's certainly survived a drop or two, and it's actually relatively comfortable in the hands too. So, considering its price, the GB300 first impressions aren't overly terrible. Unfortunately, those first impressions are certainly hampered when taking a closer look at the controls. In terms of placement and feel, the face buttons are okay, but they do have 2 major drawbacks. The first being that there's barely any travel to them, which makes them just feel hollow plus unresponsive. And the second being that you only seem to be able to press one button at a time, so it's either run or jump rather than run and jump, which can be super frustrating experience while actually playing. To the GB300's credit, the shoulder buttons are relatively well placed and likely the most responsive of all the buttons due to their tactile feel, and the D-pad is just about okay. It again suffers from a lack of travel and pivot, which occasionally makes it feel like it's floating around, so it's far from the most accurate, but it is just about passable. I did end up using the shoulder buttons as much as I could, which works well for systems like Game Boy especially, but for precision platforming, the controls' downsides are at their most obvious. As soon as you boot the GB300 up, the low quality of its 3-inch screen becomes apparent. Things are very washed out and pixelated, which is a bit of a shame, but at least it's better than the standard famiclone. The stock firmware is also super bare bones, but is at least usable, with things relatively easily laid out, and it's relatively easy to jump into games too. The search feature isn't great at all, and there's not many other features to be had, but you can at least use save states and remap the controls if you wish. So I'll jump into some gameplay footage now and summarise back up at the end. So all in all, the GB300 is at least better than the standard famiclone that is available around similar prices. But if you can pick one up for $10, the GB300 is one of those handhelds which are quite good for kids just to play in the car or whatever, but it's never going to be anyone's primary handheld, for hopefully obvious reasons. But that's it for now though. Thanks so much for watching.